Okay, on this page, we're going to be doing domain and range. So domain is always the X values that a graph hits, and range are the Y values that a graph hits. So we are given a formula, but then a graph as well. So that way, you know, you could put it in Desmos if you have a formula and this is the graph you'd get. They have labeled the vertex, which we could have found as well from this formula. 1 and -3 is the vertex. All right, so domain is what X values does this parabola hit? So if we go left to right, so domain is always left to right, range is always down to up. So left to right, well, this arrow says that we can have any negative X value or any positive X value. All the parabolas we deal with have a domain of -infinity to +infinity. And I said all the parabolas we deal with because it is possible to have a sideways parabola, but that's not a function. And so we only deal with parabolas that are functions that go right side up or upside down, not side to side. All right, so domain, -infinity to infinity for every function that's a parabola. Range is a little different. So if I go all the way down, this graph doesn't go down to -infinity. What's the lowest Y value we can hit? The lowest Y value is -3. And we do touch -3, so that's why we use a square bracket. Square bracket means we touch that Y value, and then it goes up to +infinity. All right, so not bad. Domain and range is usually easier with a graph, but what we're going to try to see is that we could have figured this out without the graph. All we need to know is the vertex, that point, and whether the graph goes up to +infinity or down to -infinity. So if the A value is positive, help if I could spell positive, then it makes a right side up parabola. So it's always some number, comma, infinity. If A is negative, it makes an upside down parabola. So that means the lowest Y value is going to be -infinity, and then the highest Y value is the Y from the vertex. So in both these cases, we're going to fill in with the Y from the vertex. That the Y value is either the lowest point or the highest point, depending on whether A is positive or negative. So it's really, the domain is always -infinity and +infinity, and the range just is determined from A and from the Y value from the vertex. So let's put that all together in these examples. Without graphing, determine the domain and range for each of the following quadratic functions. All right, so what we need to know is that this A is negative. There's a negative in front of the parentheses, so it's going to be upside down. I don't need that for domain though. Domain, -infinity to infinity. Let's fill those in for all these. If it is a quadratic equation that's a function, the domain can be any X value. If you recall, before we talked about domain restrictions being, yeah, let's review our domain rules. I got room over here. Domain rules are don't divide by 0, and no negatives under the square root. All other functions that we deal with, at least, would have a domain of -infinity to +infinity. One exception is logarithms. If you've taken sort of a higher level math class, they deal with logarithms. At PCC, that's in pre-calculus. So other than logarithms, really, the domain for most functions, I'll just say is negative infinity to positive infinity. So if we don't see an equation that has a fraction with x in the bottom or a square root, then our domain's negative infinity to infinity. All right, range though, that's going to change. So this one's upside down. So that means that it goes down to negative infinity for the y values and up to the y value of the vertex. Where did I get negative 10? Oh, right there. That's the y value of the vertex. It's that number that we're either adding or subtracting outside the equation. All right, let's try this one. This time a is positive, so it's going to be a right side up parabola. So that means this y value from the vertex is the lowest y value. So we're going to go from 1 to infinity. 1 is the lowest y value at that vertex, and then we go up from there. Last one, negative in front of the parentheses. That means upside down. So that means that the lowest y value is negative infinity, and we're going to go up to positive 10 in this case, because there's a plus 10 in that equation.